I'd like to call to order the June 28th, 2023 regular meeting of the Hastings School Board. Director Davis, could you please take attendance?
Sure thing. Director Tate.
Here.
Director Dressley.
Here.
Director Zuzik.
Present.
Chair Dean.
Here.
Vice Chair Mom.
Here.
Director Davis here. Director Beisel is not present.
All right, thank you. At this time, please stand if you are able. Remove your headwear and face the place where the flag frequently is. We'll state the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. At this time, I would accept a motion to approve the agenda.
So move. Mom. Second, Dressley.
All right. I anticipate we're going to get really better on our mics. I can feel myself forgetting to turn it off already, but we're all gonna get in the zone here. All right. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Our first action item for tonight, our next item, say that. Our next item for tonight is approval of the minutes from the May 23rd, May 24th, and May 31st board meetings. Two of those were special meetings. One was a regular meeting. This time I'd entertain a motion in a second.
Motion Zuzik.
Second, Mom.
Is there any discussion with regard to those minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Our next item is approval of the minutes from the June 14th and June 21st special board meetings. I'd entertain a motion in a second to approve.
So moved, Dressley. Second, Mom.
Smooth. Is there any discussion with regard to the minutes from the June meetings? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. And do we have an abstention? All right. So Director Tate is abstaining. The other 5 directors in attendance signify by saying aye. And with that, our approval carries. I'm clearly touching something. It keeps scrolling back to the top of my screen.
That's
So.
fine.
Okay. Well, then it's not me. Excellent. At this time, I'd like to acknowledge and recognize all of our visitors, both in attendance virtually and in person, and anyone who may choose to take the time to review this meeting later. We very much appreciate your engagement with the civil process of running the Hastings School Board. Thank you very much for your time. We have any announcements and recognitions?
None this evening.
Well, that is a false statement. Mostly that was a setup. That was a setup. Superintendent McDowell does not have any acknowledgements or announcements and recognitions. Could you please stand?
Sure.
I just want to take a minute out of our board meeting and thank you. Like really, really thank you for the 3 years of service that you've given the Hastings School District. You came in a terribly tumultuous time 3 years ago today, to this date, and you led us in such a professional way, and you've advanced the discipline of our district, you've advanced our commitment to vision, and you've served the students and the staff very, very well. And I just want to thank you for that and give you one of our highly esteemed and oh so cozy, I might not let it go. I might just sit with it during the meeting, blankets. But thank you, and we wish you the very, very best.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Our next item is a listening session summary, and we did not have anybody join us for our public input session tonight. At that time, next we'll move to reports and discussions, and at this time I would turn the microphone over to Superintendent McDowell.
Tonight I'll be brief. We're going to keep the focus on our referendum conversation and just reminding folks again that at the last board meeting, the board did choose to vote and renew the existing levy, which is one of two. It's the first levy that would have needed to go or have something done with it this November. So that phase of this process is complete. And then reminding folks that the board has been pretty overt about having conversations about what, in addition to that renewal, needs to happen in order for us to sustain the work that not only our teachers and students are working on, but just as the district as a whole needs to have in place so that we can now work towards that 2027 and what decisions need to be made about that second levy. And so that was my other piece, is just reminding folks that we're a unique district and that we have two levies, not just one big levy. And so the 2023-2024 levy is 1/2 approximately. And so now discussions around a technology levy, a curriculum levy are in play, and that's what the work of the board will be this summer to figure out what does that look like, because those dollars would provide an opportunity to free up some general fund expenditures that we currently are not made whole on, even with the amount of money that's coming in from the state this year, because there are also mandates that have happened. There's going to be a lot of things that are going to take personnel to pull off in the next 18 months with all school districts, not just Hastings, just because of the legislative work that was done. So that's really my update, is just keeping that on the forefront of everyone. I'm very confident with Dr. Champa coming in. We've been having conversations about what does this look like, what do we need to do, what's been happening, and so I feel like it's going to be a pretty seamless process with how we move forward with you as a board and with the community.
Thank you very much, and I think we'll touch a little bit more on that topic when we talk about future meetings and future topics. We'll be able to lay out some timelines when members of the community can engage and watch us do that work. So thank you. Our next report is a building construction fund project update. I believe that belongs to our Director of Business, Ms. Subert.
Just a quick reminder, the Building Construction Fund accounts for the money the district received from the voter-approved bonds, and it can only be used for school renovations and improvements. There has been a lot of work occurring in the last month. However, to the actual report, there's just a few updates. So the May interest and the May vendor payments are included in there now, but there have been no changes to projects or any additional projects. So the changes are very minor this month.
Director Tate?
I do have one question. Looking on here, I see the Nature Preserve gravel parking lot is still on here, and I believe the last note we had received was that that was on hold because of the township meeting that occurred. I'm just wondering if there's any updates to that at all.
So at this point, it is still on hold. We are working with Dakota County, and they had let us know that they would come back to us with some recommendations of possibly where the signs could go and possibly some locations on the parking lot. So right now, we're just holding it.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions with regard to the building construction fund project update? Okay, thank you. The next report and discussion for us tonight is on student wellness, and I see our Mary Ellen Fox, our Director of Health Services, is going to come up to the front table.
Okay, hi. My name's Mary Ellen Fox, and I'm the Health Services Coordinator for the Hastings, sometimes it's been called Director, but for the Hastings School District, so basically like lead nurse. And with me is Cassie Podvin, did I say that right?
Yes.
From Dakota County, and she is our liaison from Dakota County. And so I am one of the co-chairs of the Smart Choices Wellness Committee, which is about student wellness. And several years ago, I think it was 2015 or 16, a student wellness policy was enacted by the school board. And the Student Wellness Committee has been in place since 2010. And that was one of the products of this committee, was to actually have a student, or update the Student Wellness Committee. There has actually always been a wellness policy. So one of the requirements of the said wellness policy that's by the school board is to have an annual report. And so that's what this is. So thank you for your time. The Student Wellness Committee has representation from all of our buildings, and several, though we do not have specifically parents on the, just a parent on the board, we have many of our staff who are actually parents. So we sort of cover that a little bit. We met 4 times this year. There were parent newsletters. You're looking at the kind of the report right there on the screen. And so this year, in addition to having an annual student survey, we also did parent surveys and staff surveys, and they were all done in the spring. And just because I included this last year in the report, you can see the COVID cases, because COVID actually impacted our committee, because we actually did not meet for a year. So things didn't happen for a while there, but this year was kind of get back on our feet again. So there were still more cases of COVID. We were required to report to the state any cases that we learned of. So there were I'm looking at the wrong one. There were 358 known cases of COVID this past year of students and staff. So down from the previous year, but still not zero. So I think it's our new normal. So then in regards to student wellness, the students were surveyed elementary school, 3rd and 4th graders, and the middle school, we had 378 students that were surveyed, and then 365 high school students. That just kind of generalizes the results of the eating and activity opportunities. I would say we tend to be very strong in having physical activity opportunities for our students. And fairly good across the board, opportunities for healthy eating. I will say that part of these surveys, most of them were done during this food service strike. So I think that did actually flavor the responses, even though the question, especially to the parents, said in the fall of this year rather than right now, because that was a very difficult situation to be in for all parties involved at that point. So I think that colored some of the responses a little bit. So then one of the strong determinants of health, and really what we're all trying to do is raise kids who become adults that are healthy, functioning adults and contributing to our society. And though one determinant of health is having access to health care, there are actually a lot of other things that play in even more than that. And part of it is education, part of it is your social status. Another one is a feeling of belonging. And so the feeling of being safe in school really impacts how a student is able to learn, but also how their health, it impacts their health. So one of the questions we ask in the survey for the students is, I feel safe. And the result of that has been pretty much the same recently. When we did the survey when all the kids were in COVID shutdown and we were all at home, it went way up, their feeling of safety. So it's kind of weird because we're back down to closer to what was normal before that time. So I just think that's just kind of a nature of the beast. When you're at home, you probably feel safer. Not as many people you're interacting with. So just to point out, so we're really pretty strong in the physical activity opportunities. We have room for growth and some opportunities for growth in the elementary. I've said this many times, to develop an actual curriculum for health education in the elementary schools, which currently there is none. And then to also continue the work on student feelings of well-being, and so talking about their social and emotional health. And that kind of came through in all of the surveys, staff and parents as well. We have one SHIP grant that we've gotten that we've worked on this past year that Molly Cirillo was in charge of, and that had to do with student well-being. And now this next time around, we're going to be installing a chill zone at Pinecrest Elementary School. So there's going to be a room where students that are dysregulated can go, where they just need to be on their own. It's an open space, but it's a private space as well. So it's not, so it's a spot where they can get out what they need to, but they're not in other people's way. With that, I'm going to just stop talking. Any questions for me about, because you guys all had a chance to look at all of these things. There's a lot of things you can look at. Questions? Mark?
Are these same questions asked in other schools?
No,
Okay.
this is our unique
Got it.
developed survey. The one that shows the middle school, those questions, I think, we just took them and each year have shown those to compare previous years to now. And so it just kind of gives us some information. So there are questions.
I was just thinking about norm referencing, but
Yeah.
thank you.
Yes.
I don't expect an answer right now, but is there anything that the school board that we can do to help with the program? I'm just thinking to help with, you mentioned elementary health. So from a governance standpoint, what does that look like from our end? Really appreciate this report. This is fantastic, and I see a lot of opportunities for growth. So don't need an answer now, but as things come up, just communicating those needs through administration
Yeah.
to the board.
Thank you. I would say that one way would just be, Rachel and I have talked about having a curriculum review and really kind of take a look at seeing what's going on. Just because there isn't a health curriculum doesn't mean students aren't being taught health, but it's probably more by champions, so people that feel passionately about it. And then when that person leaves, it's gone. And it might just be for a handful of students that get it. So that's why having a curriculum is so important, so that we really have a sustainability of that. So I would say support that agenda. And parents and staff did note that the removal of the physical activity in 10th grade, that was noted several times by many people. So I know that is something you could look at as well. Yeah. Any other questions?
I'm not going to frame this as a question. I'm just going to frame it as a reflection, and that's around healthy eatings opportunity. I've always sensed, more recently sensed some tension around that, both around on sort of two levels. One, I think we do a very good job of providing a wide range of fresh fruits and vegetables at lunch, and ensuring that when students take a lunch that it complies with federal standards. That's not the same as that student choosing to eat the thing that they take.
Correct.
So as we talk about opportunities to improve, I think we want to consider what that might look like and how to make that appealing. And then the counterpoint, I've sensed tension you hear from parents is, I want to send a treat for a birthday, or I want to send a treat for something, and that treat is perceived to be, a box of donuts or a box of cupcakes or something. And I think I'm just reflecting that the degree of social pressure around what's perceived to be a treat and what the quality of healthy eating is as a piece of celebration. And I appreciate even just stopping and asking people this question and asking students this question hopefully slows their impulse decision-making in that regard. It's a difficult place to work, arena to work in, I think.
Well, and actually the wellness policy does today no birthday treats. So that was actually very controversial when it was passed. Yes, I know.
My impression is it's still controversial.
It is still controversial, yes. Yeah. So thank you for your support. It is a privilege to come and speak with you, and I applaud all of your efforts to have our students be healthy and socially and emotionally able to function, and so that they can learn. So all of those things play into a student being able to succeed at school. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your time. Our next report and discussion tonight is our Read Well plan, which might be slightly misnamed in terms of a plan, and it might be slightly more reporty, but I think we might hear more about that. And welcome our Director of Teaching and Learning, Ms. Larson.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Hadeen, Superintendent McDowell, and members of the board. As Chair Hadeen said, I'm here to report tonight on what is called a local literacy plan, or what we also talk about is the Read Well plan. And this plan is a brief overview of what we do and what we've done during the school year. So it is not about the upcoming school year, it is a review of the past school year. And just to highlight that it is an overview, and it has been part of expectation for many years, and the district has produced this report and submitted it to MDE every July after the calendar school year. However, it's only been reported to you publicly for this will be the second year. So it's been a new process. So I know there were questions about, will it contain that? Are we going to address this? What about that? Those are great questions. This is a brief overview report, but I'd engage with you in conversation about if you want it extended in the future, how that could look, or how we can blend it into future reports when we look at the world's best workforce, or when I come to work sessions and talk about the curriculum process, and then also our data analysis and school improvement planning. So we can go deeper, but this will be a brief overview. So we'll just go through the report as it will be submitted. So it does follow statute that the district submits an overview of a plan of what they have done throughout the school year to meet the needs of student literacy. And so the objectives are to ensure that we inform all stakeholders about the generalized plan of what we've accomplished, and to focus on reading well by third grade, which you know of as part of the World's Best Workforce Plan. And a big part of what we do with this is not really visible in here in detailed data, but it's how we develop plans for students who are not reading at grade level. There is incredible work happening behind the scenes in the classroom within tiered interventions and supporting unique needs of learners that we can go deeper on. So being a part of the World's Best Workforce, we make sure that the committee work we do, from school improvement planning to building leadership teams to the elementary literacy leadership team to the district literacy leadership team, that we're aligning our efforts and that we're having conversations across different groups of families. So we'll seek out family input for those that are receiving intervention services. We'll seek out input in literacy through the Curriculum Advisory Council. We'll do that through staff development. So administrators, staff, parents, all are a part of this, and students actually get surveyed too that are receiving services for literacy. So if you look at the first section, which is pre-K3 literacy goals and committees, we've been thrilled this year to have some more normalcy and sneak out of some of those COVID restrictions, because we weren't able to partner as much with early childhood, pre-K, and kindergarten, along with other childcare providers, other pre-K providers. And so we're getting back into that to ensure that there's the preparation and support needed so that when our kindergarten students join us on the first day of school, they feel prepared and have the baseline skills they need to be successful. So the one piece with the district literacy goal that you can see is this district literacy goal is one that we kept in alignment with the World's Best Workforce goal. And the reason why we kept this in alignment is because this is part of a public report. And we wanted to ensure that we didn't have multiple goals that confuse people. But it's important to know that in the buildings, we drill down into those goals, and it actually goes from a district level to a building level to a grade level to a classroom level, and then to an individual student level. So that's the depth of how we zone in on needs. So the goal is that we will have an increase to 56% in 2023 of those meeting or exceeding expectations on the MCA reading assessment, from 49.4% in 2022. So those results will be embargoed by the state through August, so we can't publicize and share that. So that's why some of the data reports come to you after the next school year starts, or late August. So So then if you scroll into section 2, assessments, we provide a brief overview of the assessment measurements that we give. And we first start with screening measures, and these are required by statute that we screen all students and what their literacy levels are, and then we develop plans for those that may not be at grade level. Our assessment tool is FastBridge, and we do an A reading assessment and an early reading assessment. And assessments focus on different pieces. So when we look at data, they all help inform our view of a student, but we can't compare or say that the FastBridge assessment will tell us how they're going to do on the MCA. The MCA will be a predictor of the BAS. It's more complicated than that because they're measuring different things, but we do step out to say, what does this give us the overall picture of a student's literacy level? We also use the benchmark assessment system, and what's different of the benchmark assessment system is it's delivered on paper and one-on-one with the teacher. The FastBridge and the MCA are online assessments, and one of our concerns is we don't have students taking assessments on computers outside the MCA and the FastBridge, so it's not a mode of testing that they're used to. And so we're looking at what that does to their ability to feel confident and prepared to do it, because we notice changes in how kiddos, even with their fine motor skills, right? Running a mouse or trying to use an iPad for an MCA test. So they're all online now, so it's not a choice to use paper unless it's a modification, but that is something that we balance to make sure that we have online and paper. So the benchmark assessment system tells us the reading levels of our students and how their comprehension and phonics development is progressing. We have an HCAT, which is a kindergarten readiness assessment checklist that we give so that we know where our students are when they enter kindergarten. We have the PAST and a phonics screener, which we just call the PAST and the QPS. And that's given at the beginning of the year, and that helps feed a lot of information for us related to potential dyslexia attributes or convergence disorder. So then we also have diagnostic measures that we look at that dive deeper into what is a skill area that we can focus on. How do we learn more about what is happening either within the brain and the development of the learner or the skill? And so then we'll look at frequency word lists, early literacy measures, CBMs or curriculum-based oral reading fluency, and then a dyslexia screener. And then we also use FastBridge to progress monitor. So when we set goals for students individually, we progress monitor, and we do that weekly with some assessment tools. We do that every few weeks with some assessment tools, every quarter, every semester, and every end of the year. It just depends on the specificity of need. Parent notification and engagement. This describes how generally classroom teachers communicate progress with parents for their students' development. And then it also comes down into when students are identified for intervention. Parents give approval for that. If it's an outside intervention where they're leaving class time to have another scoop, we call it, or another separate small group or individual time for literacy instruction, that would be a tier 3 intervention. And then parents are more intensely involved and kept up to date when students are in a tier 3 intervention outside the classroom. That means they have a reading specialist working with them or a support paraprofessional working with them. Section 4, literacy instruction in the core classroom. We've been doing a lot of work with this. When I came into the district in 2021, what I heard most was help with our elementary literacy. Over the past 8 years, the pieces that were put into play in the curriculum review that happened was at a time of transition when one director was leaving, another one was coming on, and people doing the best they can to make sure everything transitions, but things just didn't go as seamlessly as possible. So what was discovered was that staff were working incredibly hard but having to focus on some of the wrong things. We want our staff focusing on instruction and the skill levels of the students they're working with, not spending hours trying to find resources to use. My job is to make sure they have the resources and the professional development skills they need to focus on the kids. And they were like, help, we're spending way too much time trying to find things, trying to create things. We had purchased resources, but they were scattered, and then they weren't always keeping up with the needs as evidence-based practice changed. They weren't flexible. So we've been, this is year 2 now, in a curriculum review, and we were going to bring recommendations to you, but the READ Act, which I'm thrilled about, has changed some of that. So we're putting that on hold so that we know that our recommendations align with MDE or what else we need to look at to make sure that that happens. So when you see this part and read this section, you'll see the 5 pillars of literacy by the National Reading Panel, and this is all supported by the science of reading. And this basically sets our framework for literacy instruction. For the most part, districts have the same framework for pillars of literacy. What they select with professional development may vary, and how they support staff in that. But one of the other pieces that we've really refined is, what does that literacy block look like during the day? We have about 150 minutes, depends K4, different level learners, that we spend in literacy and writing. That includes grammar, phonics, word study, all of that. And the components of that are an interactive read aloud, reader's workshop, writer's workshop, word study, and shared reading. So we'll be enhancing that, and we'll be bringing more to you once we know MDE's recommendations on what specific resources we'll be asking you to support purchasing when we have that from MDE and we cross-reference it. We're in alignment. We're really excited because when I meet with my MACL colleagues, Metro Area Curriculum Directors, there's a lot of hesitancy of people that were in the process of purchasing, or they just purchased when the new standards went into effect in 2019. And now there's a shift with now MDE and the legislature is like, we're shifting to science of reading. And that's forcing some people to re-examine. We're in a perfect place because that's what we focused on. So it's been in alignment with everything that the READ Act, and so our elementary literacy leadership team was thrilled about that and felt really good about that work. So we're excited for that. So that was just an overview of that. Then literacy intervention. This details what we do tier 1. Regardless of if a student is needing intervention, the classroom teacher is going to monitor their learning, right? That's a part of just the natural role of a teacher. So they'll be individualized and in small groups according to wherever they're at on the development, but the intensity and frequency will increase as their needs increase. So students that need a little more help may spend more time in small group with a teacher. Then students that need even more help will be outside with a reading specialist. And then you can see just the skill areas that we're working on and the resources. We've analyzed, I'm excited to share with you when I get to bring data, the results that we've had for growth for our intervention. We started assessing our intervention program last year, and this year we're able to implement changes into that, and we have seen incredible growth. We started aligning the classroom teachers' learning with the intervention, supporting the support paraprofessionals in their skill development and lining resources, and the growth was phenomenal that was made. We don't always see the growth come to fruition on an MCA because a jump from partially meets or does not meet to meeting or exceeds is a huge growth in a year, but we see it in other measurements like a fast bridge or a BAS where they may have increased their reading levels 4 steps. And it's so fun to see that. And I can't wait to share that with you. Probably August, September, whenever.
Yeah, I was just going to say, based on some of the questions and the dialogue that we had going on prior to this meeting, once this plan got posted and the results got posted, tentatively, super tentatively, I put it in the October work session, but realistically it may be the September work session. I think it's going to depend on when MCA results are released and how well that aligns, and when MDE gives specific guidance with regard to the READ Act. But that would be a time that I anticipate at a work session we could just really like get that gritty good story.
Yeah.
But know that it's, and I put the note in there that October is just a placeholder. So know that that's already been reflected in our anticipated work.
So this just continues to take you through each grade level and resources that we use. We are continuing to look at narrowing those resources because those are a lot of different resources to use, and we need to make sure that we have specificity of skill focus for our intervention programming. So, but that's what was in place for this year, so you'll see that lesson next year. Our MLL programming, our multilingual learners or multiple language learners are also our English language learners. So we ensure that their WIDA are the standards that set the learning for the multilingual learners, that they're in alignment with our state standards, of course, but there's also specialized instruction when students are learning language twice, basically, right? When they have that gift of learning English literacy in our classrooms. So we've been doing a lot of work with the MLL, and we're starting curriculum review with that department, K-12, for the first time this August. So excited about that. The past few years, MDE has supported districts in recognizing and identifying and supporting students that may have attributes of dyslexia and/or convergence disorder. And we have been following MDE's recommendations. So for every student that may be reading below grade level, teachers give them a dyslexia screener. That doesn't get communicated with parents unless there are red flags, but it is given to every student in the classroom quick, and the teacher goes through some checklists of looking at, are these some attributes that we see happening, and do we need to have a further conversation? Because as educators, we can't diagnose that. We can only say that here are attributes we see, here are resources you can look into, and options that we can provide for dyslexia instruction. But the science of reading, the exciting part of that is it focuses a lot on attributes and instructional skills that benefit students with dyslexia. So. Then professional development. The last 2 years, we've focused very specifically on instructional techniques for teachers with interactive read-alouds. The interactive read-alouds are when they implement and integrate the state standards and the learning targets that you probably have heard your students talk about, and they practice that with a gradual release model where the teacher models, then the class does that, and then it goes into small group, individual group. Then we focus on phonemic awareness and phonics, ensuring that our staff can identify that continuum of literacy development and how to intervene and what to do when you intervene, when you see specific lagging skills with phonics and phonemic awareness. And then really focusing on small guided group reading. We're making sure that during our group reading time, that is the most specified planning instruction we have in a day for a kiddo. Because it's when the teacher knows the most about where they're at, and they have 3 to 4 students, and they may have alike needs, and they get to support that level of instruction really deeply and work one-on-one while they're with a small group. That's where you see the increase in development. Not so much whole group, because as we know, if we're struggling, whole group doesn't always meet the needs. So transitioning into really solid small group, we're seeing gains, and that's exciting. Then we have literacy leaders that help, and we've had an elementary literacy leadership team. We're writing, starting tomorrow, interactive read-alouds and diving into that. We have 3 days of writing this summer, and I'm also excited that we worked with the union to offer 2 days of professional development to our elementary teachers this summer. It's the first time we've done that in a long time, I believe, where we're trading out professional development days. They still report during the school year, but we're taking 2 days from the school year and having them report in the summer, because the learning and concentration and ability to collaborate is so much easier when you're not exhausted and worrying about getting back to email, correcting, prepping for the next day, worrying about next week, worrying about setting up science, worrying about, right, we get focus time. And we have, I believe, 75 to maybe now 85% of our staff are choosing that. So, and the ones that didn't just couldn't because of vacation schedules. So we get to do that at the end of July, and we'll continue doing that for practice so that it's optimal learning time, just like we focus on for students. When's the best time for staff? It's not in the middle of exhaustion, right? So we're excited for that. Then the last part here is the summary of assessment data, and you can see the numbers. When I bring more data reports to you, we'll dive into that. For the most part, we're seeing increases. The assessments do change, so it's interesting to look at, and I can bring you examples because like the FastBridge assessment will start at one level, but it will increase levels. So if the student's not being compared to the same assessment that they were being compared at, it assumes they've grown with the grade level. And so we'll be looking at that data in depth with you. And then our benchmark assessment system data.
Excuse me, Rachel, or Ms. Larson, may I ask a question in that regard?
bet.
So I understood that to be across year, but when we look at it, and I know you're going to dig into this more in the future, but in general, a FastBridge assessment for being proficient in winter, that there's an expectation of where a student of that grade would be in winter.
Yes.
And that's an assessment. There's a different expectation of what proficient would look like in the spring. And so that's why you may see that backward piece, because you're comparing to one level in the winter and you're at this. And then the expectation is that the student will have grown, not
Yep.
from year to year, different number even, but even from winter to spring.
Yep.
And so that it's a different level of comparison. Is that accurate
Yes,
for
that's-
FastBridge? Okay.
That's accurate. And the other piece that if you see some of these numbers and you gasp, we do too, right? But it doesn't tell us the story. What tells us the story that we haven't shown you are those growth reports. Because we look at some of these numbers and we're not happy about that, right? We want to do better and we need to do better. We know we have other measurements in the classroom that indicate that students are comprehending and gaining literacy skills. They're maybe not showing it on some assessments. However, you get to see the growth reports of, even though a student may have not met the proficiency scale mark for FastBridge, they grew sometimes a grade and a half, level and a half, right? Because they may have started second grade at kindergarten, right? And trying to catch up is really difficult. And that's one of the things we're seeing across the system that I'll advocate for is the diversity of academic, social, emotional, behavioral readiness in kindergarten is something that is a real struggle for kindergarten teachers because we'll have students with just an incredible span difference that are all coming together for the first time. In early childhood, they had classes of 14, 15 with a support paraprofessional in the room. And then that's a big transition even for our kids to a class of 22, 23. And, you know, their reading levels may be everywhere from A, where there's no letter recognition or sound recognition or number recognition, to kids that know all their numbers, know the alphabet, have already begun reading, and are progressing along that phonemic awareness of pronunciation and putting sentence structure together. So there's a lot of story behind some of this, but this is the overall overview of our local literacy plan. So with that, any questions that you may have?
Thank you. So I just had a couple of questions. So obviously with the READ Act, everything's going to change. And so next year it'll be every student is reading that grade level by the end of the school year. I mean, obviously that's the goal, but that's not going to be where we're at. How can we help you get to that point? Because next year we're going to be reporting on every student, not just the up to third grade students. What can we do as the board to help you get there?
Thank you for that question. That means a lot. Resources. Like I said, when I came into the district, the time staff were spending creating, I mean, teachers, they were just struggling. They shouldn't have to do that, right? But it's taken us a while. We've went through the process saying we're not going to buy something quick and fast that we go 2 years later, 3 years later, and we're not using it again because we didn't make the right decision and it's not meeting our needs. We're going to make sure that we look at the data. We do a full assessment of what our current reality is. We look at what are the desired results, what do we know we need, and then bring those recommendations forward. So those will be coming to you. I'm hoping MDE thinks they'll give their recommendations for resources and professional development August, by the latest January is what I've heard. So it is, yeah. But you helped purchase books for us to replace classroom libraries, just their individual reading level books. That was significant because the books before were sometimes photocopied. They were out of date. Kids were looking at images that they were like, what is that? Right? I mean, it just isn't even an object in their world. Yeah.
Telephone with the cord.
Yeah, and so that and just being responsive to the world in which they're currently living and having more explicit skills tied to standards-based learning in the books has helped. Along with that, one piece that we're trying to build in is instructional coaching. We have a multi-tiered systems of support process, but one of the things that does differentiate us from other districts is because we don't have QComp funds, we're trying to find ways to help provide in-classroom support with teachers so that they don't have to learn something and then do it on their own and try to figure it out and then not get support until they look at data later and are like, I don't know what I could have done. I'm frustrated. I put so much time into this. So we're looking at opportunities for that. And I think a really strong conversation about what are resources needed to support our staff with expectations of increasing grade level literacy. It is definitely support in the classroom, and that is something that does delineate us from other districts that I think is it's a disservice to our staff to not have some support. Andy Larson tries, the principals try, but it's just not conducive to a structure of when we have other responsibilities to do that. So I think our staff would really appreciate that. And then that can bring data for the kids that help teachers with some of the pieces so that the teachers can focus on instruction. That's the biggest piece shift that we need to have them freed up to do, and not all the other busy work of creating, finding, figuring things out. So I'm excited for that READ Act, so thank you for that question. And yeah, I'm excited to show you the data for the students that have grown too, because again, looking at the measurements, it's hard to see just a MCA growth right away. We might see it later, and we've seen that with some of our data that our students are just learning in elementary, but they start those skills that slowly improve their MCA, even though it's a different test every year. So, yeah.
Dr. McDowell?
I would just add to that. So when we're looking at reading, particularly at the elementary level and before pre-K, that it can't be looked at individually as its own piece, right? It's part of a bigger complex thing. So as a board, when you're talking about how do we support reading, how do we support moving the kids, really what it is supporting kids' growth faster than what we've typically seen, right? So a couple pieces to that. One, you've noticed that we've put into the budget extra help for behavior. So we're looking at things like with the non-exclusionary discipline, how do we support that in the classroom? All of that type of stuff as a board plays into what can and can't happen in the classroom. The second piece is, as a board, continue the push on expecting fidelity across classrooms. Right? You aren't going to get all kids moving unless you get all classrooms moving. And that means that you have to have instructional fidelity across kindergarten inside of a building, across multiple buildings. Same for second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth, all the way up. And then that push for vertical alignment, right? Making sure that we've got systems in place where our first grade teachers can talk to our second grade teachers, and that's working out. That PLCs are given the support that they need in order to do that. All of that stuff at the board level is what needs to be supported to get us to catch up faster. So that's what you can do at the governance level, is ask a lot of questions when things that don't seem to be directly connected to reading might be connected to reading or any other subject, because they're supporting the whole process. And all of it feeds into that reading piece to get the kids caught up.
Director Tate?
As I look through the data, I'm just curious. I know you had mentioned younger kids may not test as well on like a computer. I know obviously parents can opt their kids out of MCAs. Are there any other real factors that you see that might influence these so that they aren't, I'm going to say not valid, but that they're not, where they really are?
Individually for students, there does tend to be test anxiety. I don't know if we all remember what tests we would have. I would all of a sudden, what is this, right? The Iowa basic skills.
Iowa came straight to mind.
Yep.
Totally like Iowa.
And our staff do a great job of trying to create that this is important, but not so important that you need to worry about it, but just getting kids comfortable with it. And I think understanding the purpose, because as some students get older, they question why they do it, right? They may be like, oh, yep, we have to take this again, right? So there's motivation involved because you can't grade it. You can't have it count for anything. It's more for the teacher data to look at, administrative data. And then I think just the environment for students, that the modality of just assessment is so much more than a test, right? And so our staff will give other forms of assessment, writing, right? Group assessments. So when all of a sudden a test has all these rules that you get read to you because you have to, and you've got to do it this way, and it creates a different environment. And that's not an excuse, but we know we need to help students get comfortable with that. And another piece is the MCA really assesses standards teaching, right? Not always just the skills, but the language in the standards. So then we start asking, our teachers are incredible and they're working incredibly hard making growth. But then we get the MCA and we're like, wait, what? So then we look, what are the priority standards and what's the language, which is why we're focusing on the interactive read aloud, because that's where we need to keep the grade level rigor for every student aligned with the standard language and skill. So there's so many different ways to teach literacy that the MCA is very tailored to the Minnesota standards, right? It's different than Iowa, it's different than Michigan. And so we all have our own little style, and it's when we've switched from teaching curriculum to teaching standards, that's been a tough switch for a lot of staff. And the last few MCAs have become increasingly more complex and focused on the standards, not the overall discipline skill. And that's where you see people going, ooh, we gotta not teach to the test, right? We wanna be broader than that, but we need to teach to the standard and the skill rigor for every kid.
Yeah. Thank you. I do have one more question. I know I had asked questions earlier today and about what are we doing to improve these numbers, and you had mentioned Orton Gillingham. And I'm familiar with it, not real familiar, but I've heard of it and I'm aware that it's one of the best programs out there, but it's also expensive. So I'm just wondering if we have that built into the budget that we're approving tonight or not.
Not yet. MDE hasn't, if I'm accurate, they haven't fully disclosed what funds will be available to support some of the expectations, but the Orton Gillingham supports the professional development. That's one. Letters is another one, and people are excited about letters, but that's an incredibly high demand professional development. But we believe both will be part of the professional development that MDE says districts need to participate in. And what we believe is that they will be also sponsoring opportunities with the U of M or other consultant groups to offer that PD for schools so that we don't have to all seek it out differently. But when I first got into the district, we looked at the letters investment, and to have all of our staff K4, including our interventionists and our MLL staff, it would be about a $500,000 investment, because either the sub costs along with the professional development, along with the time teachers have to put in outside just doing homework, or paying them in the summer to do, I think, 16 different modules. So great stuff. We have some staff that have done letters and Orton Gillingham. What we're moving to is to ensure that every interventionist is Orton Gillingham and letters trained. So that starts this summer, fall. That's our first round internally.
Thank you.
This is just a comment and a commercial, I suppose. The Summer Leadership Seminar for MSBA is learning to read the science of literacy. So that might be a good opportunity for us as board members to learn about literacy firsthand from the experts, like Kim Gibbons from the U of M, et cetera.
That's fantastic.
And Mark, would you like to mention when the early bird registration ends?
The early bird registration ends on the 30th, and so if you're interested in, thank you, if you're interested in saving the district a little bit of money, get a hold of Becky before what is that, Thursday, Friday? Yeah.
Mark, would you mind sending me that? Be great, thank you.
Dr. McDowell?
I just want to go back to the specifics of the budget question first. So while it's not specifically called out in the budget, we have money in the budget for both professional development and curriculum. So specifically allocated, no, but that's one of the things as we've tried to strategically place money in those buckets that I'm always talking about. This is one of them because we knew this was coming down the pike. We didn't know what it was. It's also, I'm going to go back to the levy thing, right? This is one of those things of the mandates that are coming down for districts that don't have them in place. A district like ours might need to entertain adding more to their revenue source to pay for new things that are coming that we want to sustain over a one-time expenditure. So this would be an example of that because you're always going to have to train. It's not a one and done training with these things. It takes multiple years to get all of your teachers, and then you have attrition. So you're constantly in a training cycle with new people as they come on board.
Do we have any other questions at this time from the board? Comments? All right. Thank you very much for the time in your report, and I'm looking forward to, we have Ms. Larson joining us at a couple of work sessions coming up, both to learn about our gifted and talented and differentiated learning and refresh ourselves about the curriculum cycle and acquisition review cycle. I think I had anticipated prior to the READ Act being passed that we might learn about that today, only because we would have anticipated some acquisition questions coming to us, but that's been put off. So we look forward to hearing that. And then, like I said, I just penciled in so that we all know, based on the conversations up to this point, that we're going to hear about those data details in that September-October timeframe and get to look at that in more detail. And I think that'd be a great time because we'll know more of the guidance from MD to have that conversation about what those goals look like. So thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
Our next report is an update from 9/17, so I'm going to turn the microphone over to myself. The proposed budget, the document attached says proposed budget, and the presentation that was adopted is shown from 9/17. A couple of the things that are unique, and I know that Director Zuzik is infinitely aware about this, about 9/17 is all of their, not all of, the vast majority of their funding is based on student enrollment. And if they can and they have a waiting list. So it's kind of this tension point, right? If they can get the staff they need, they can take students off the waiting list and they can pay for those staff. So it's this place where if you look at it in any level of detail, you'll see some reductions. In most cases, those are reductions of positions they were unable to fill over the last year. I also think it's interesting on a broad scale, everything 9/17 does, literally everything, is linked to their mission and vision and goals. So if you go back to the top of this presentation, and this was not true last year, but it's true this year, is the budget development and core values are reflected in how they talk about their budget. And it's just a different take on it, and it's interesting to me the degree to which they continue to drive that conversation into their culture. I will note, because we've had conversations at our board table recently about fund balance, 9/17's fund balance is currently at 19%, and it is going down as they're using those funds and making those choices. They do have a policy at 15%, which is very close to our board's policy. And the last detailed piece is if you look at construction, CTE rates, construction and technical education, the rate has gone up. The rate has gone up because they were finally able to fill 2 positions, which is great because those have been services and opportunities they would have not been able to provide to students in the past. So they were able to fill those positions, and that's why it looks so dramatically different, because they were at a very, very low number in the last year. And then the other attachment is the monthly staff and board report. It's a very bullet oriented. As you can see, they're doing a lot of the same things that we're doing with regard to changing staffing, changing status as people move from position to position, and their minutes are attached in detail on their website. But I don't have anything to add in addition to that at this time. They have a lot of graduation ceremonies. That's what I want to add. I think I went to like 8 graduation ceremonies, many of which had cupcakes, I'm just going to say. So it was not a burden. It was a little bit of a burden to get there, but general happiness once I made it. Our next report for tonight is Policy Committee. Vice Chair Moe.
And if you're comfortable with it, I'm going to just do a very brief summary. We'll just keep moving forward and attempt to, I don't know. All right, so there are a lot of policies at the table tonight for first and second reading. Sorry, I'm gonna mess around with this. What happens if I move it? Is that, okay. All right, so first and second reading, there's one for approval and then one for removal tonight. The details of the policies are in the policy summary located on board book. That's for board members and community members too. If you want to take a look at what the policy committee has been up to over the last 2 months, it's summarized in board book. And then also we added in what we're planning on tackling generally in July. Before we go into the actual policies, I do want to just ask, just have board members be cognizant of the work that the policy committee is doing. We continue to have a lot on our plate. With this 3-year review cycle and breaking it down, on paper, it was great. In practice, we're finding it's
arduous.
Yes, it's a lot of work, especially when we are putting as much time as we are. I mean, our meetings are 2+ hours. So we're a little bit behind on the 3-year review schedule. And then we got, 25, 26 policies that are legislative changes from MSBA in the state. So we're just asking the board to be respectful and consider the intent of our reviews for this next year and the workload that we're currently working on. Ideally, we would get a lot of this done by August so that handbooks are updated. After that, hopefully there is some open time that we can take a look at, I know there was the 300 series policies we wanted to take a look at. There's the 200 series procedures, which is something the board owns. And we want to make sure that we're getting through this 2023 review cycle of policies in a timely manner and meeting the goals that we had let you know that we are working towards at the beginning of the year. Okay. So for first read, we have policy 203. If you want to take a look at that. We updated listening sessions to public comment sessions, adding consent agenda, which you'll see as a policy for review tonight, and added topics to future meetings, so it reads future meetings and topics. And then what I'll do is open it up to the floor for any comments, and I would ask the other policy committee members to take notes as well, so that when we meet again, we are on top of it.
So at this point, we're at 203.2, first reading. And I know comments have been provided electronically for the, have anything for discussion tonight?
Okay, hearing none, let's move to, sorry, I opened up my notes before looking at 203.5 school board meeting agenda. The only change that is reflective on here is 3B, where it reads board members, and then we struck the second sentence. Open it up. Okay, we're gonna move forward. Policy 203.6, consent agenda. This is not a policy, or this is a policy that ISD 200 does not currently have. There are no changes from the MSBA model policy 203.6. Open it up for comments on that.
My only comment is thank you for taking this on. This was a point that was raised in a, I forget if it was a chair chat or some online thing with MSBA that I thought would make good sense for us to have in place, would facilitate our work. So thank you for taking that on.
Policy 207, public hearings. So we took out the procedures because I believe it's earmarked for September, adding procedures or going through procedures and what that looks like for our 200 series policies.
Director Tate.
Could you please remind me, I know we've gone back and forth on this several times now, where are we going to have the 200 series procedures?
Great question, and a topic for conversation in September. No, I know, and I know I say that tongue in cheek too. So it's one of those that, do we have like policy 206, for example? We have 206.1, we have 206.2. Those are procedures. Does it make sense to have those procedures housed as a supplementary document, or is it better suited in the handbook? I think that as a board, when we do have this conversation, it'll be a lengthy conversation, but I think it'll be very fruitful, and we'll definitely come to a decision on that. So I know that with the hearings too, so 206 does also outline that. If you take a look, 206 is pretty lengthy, and it does discuss the procedures for public hearings.
Yeah, I guess one of the reasons that I'm asking is because I am a little concerned when you're talking about something like public hearings when it directly impacts, the public who want to come and speak. I just want to make sure that it's not too complicated for them to try to figure out how they do that. So I was just a little bit concerned about pulling the procedure out of this particular policy, knowing that, yes, there are details in 206 also, but that's also a different thing. That's not necessarily just public hearings, that's public comment. So I guess my thought was, if we know we're basically going to use well, it's not even going to be similar, right? Because it is a different procedure that's used for public hearings versus public comment. If the board would consider leaving the procedure for this particular one in this policy, just because it is so directed at the public versus, other policies are more directed for us and staff and, internal people is what I'm trying to say.
I'm going to grant myself, and I'm still coming back to you, Director Dressley, I promise. I believe it's Burnsville, which is another district that's on 917, and they use a practice where it's all on their same website, but they nest procedures under there, but they just have a slightly different name even as you drop down in the policy. That might be a place, and I'll go look at it if I'm remembering the wrong district, and I'll send the policy folks a note. But I felt it felt kind of easy to reference. We did it once quickly in a 917 meeting, and it kind of gets at the point that you're raising, Director Tate, which is it's a procedure. It's not in the policy. The policy is still pretty lean and clean, but a person would look at it in nearly the same place or on the same page. But I'm going to write myself a note to double check that location. And then now that you're busy taking notes, Director Dressley, I will give you the microphone.
So it's my understanding that the public hearings that's pretty much dictated by statute. Am I incorrect about that?
Yes and no. Depends upon what the public hearing is about, right? So for example, if you're doing a public hearing on truth and taxation, there's guidance on that. If you're doing a public hearing on a school closure, there's a guidance on that. However, there's also flexibility for the board inside of that to do certain things, which is why the recommendation is to take the procedure out of this. I think it's well worth the conversation because I think the board does need to grapple with the fact that you really don't want to lock yourself into something in policy when it comes to public hearings, different than your public comment, because public hearings, there's such a broad reason for having a public hearing, different than public comment for a board meeting. And typically, at least in my experience, with public hearings, regardless of whether you have a procedure or not, the board and or administrative assistant or whoever is putting out well in advance of that what the process and procedure is going to be for that specific evening or evenings or day. That's where I would go with it. That'd be my recommendation. I just don't think you want to lock yourself into anything procedurally.
And that is something that we've been working on over the last year is evaluating these policies so that we're not adding limitations to the public or to the board or to the district. And it does state in paragraph C that the school board retains the right to designate time, place, manner, unless otherwise directed by law. So if you take a look at what was struck, that is time, place, and manner. And it is also reflective in 206. Those specific items are in 206, which is a cross-reference of this policy. But it is something, I did make a note here that we may need to take a look at, do we, I'm so sorry, I don't know what is going on. Do we keep it for the 200 series specifically? Do we keep procedures in these policies, or do we, where is this going to be housed? So I do have a note about that.
Director Zuzek.
Just following up with a quick observation, when you look at the language that's been recommended for striking here, most of it is, it shows a continuum of response. It talks about the school board retaining the right to do this, the school board retaining the right to do this. In certain circumstances, the school board retaining the right to do this. It's not overwhelmingly prescriptive, and it also, it's vague by design. Even the language that we're striking isn't specific, so.
Good discussion. Policy 806, crisis management policy. So the edits that you see on here are statutory and also administration recommendations.
Director Tate.
I have a couple of questions on why some information is being struck. The first one is in the general statement of policy. It's the last sentence. It reads, the building principal will review, update, and submit the site's emergency management plan to the superintendent at the beginning of each school year. I'm wondering why that's being struck, because I see that as a valuable checkpoint and kind of mandatory. What do I want to say? Mandatory. Make sure that it's actually being done on a regular basis.
So we don't operate in isolation any longer. The crisis emergency plan is a comprehensive plan that involves everybody. So there isn't a specific building that would be different than our entire district. It's all woven into the same thing. So the only thing that's going to change are going to be specifics to a building layout, a facility setup. This building has multiple stories where an elementary school is a single story. That stuff, I don't need a building principal to be reporting that to me, but the flow of what's going to happen in a given event is all done in a similar manner, because we want our responses to be the same, because we're typically working with emergency management on those responses as well.
Thank you. The other one that I was looking at was regarding CPR. The policy previously read, each school site will have at least 5 employees certified in CPR, and we're striking at least 5. And I guess I'm wondering why we wouldn't want to have some sort of a minimum on that.
Two reasons. Having at least 5 is arbitrary in the number. Secondly, the administering of CPR has changed to what it was. And lastly, our buildings all have AEDs in them at this point in time.
So then I guess I have a follow-up question. Are staff then required to be trained on the AEDs, or a certain number of staff or anything?
Yeah, each building has a response team, a group of people that are trained in using the AEDs and respond to crisis in the building.
Thank you.
It looks like Director Tate has one more.
I forgot this one. So in the where is it here? Section 7, F. Yes, 7F. It talks about active shooter simulations, and this is language that's been added. And I'm just curious what this means ultimately. Active shooter simulations, it says that a parent or legal guardian of a student in grades 9 through 12 must have the opportunity to opt their student into participating in an active shooter simulation. So I was just wondering if is it because it's only offered 9 through 12 and that's why it's limited, or what?
So the bigger picture here is that statutory change is that the legislature is making a distinction between an active shooter drill and an active shooter simulation, right? So an active shooter drill is what we typically know, where a school building is doing a drill as if there was something happening resembling an active shooter in the building. An actual active shooter simulation is what you've heard of, where you might be partnering with the police department, with the sheriff's department, and they might actually be bringing in someone to pretend to be a simulated shooter drill. So that requires, if you're going to do that simulation, you now have to allow students to opt out of that. As far as the actual grades and all that, this is directly out of the statute at this point. So my interpretation of it is the same as yours, in that the expectation would be that simulations are done at the secondary level, and in this case at the high school. To be honest, I've never heard of a district doing an active shooter simulation at the elementary level. That'd be a little tough, even before legislation.
Thank you.
Moving forward to second readings, we have policy 209, the code of ethics. So there was a discussion about adding in, if you take a look at 2A1, be respectful to others. I am not in love with the numbering, but that is just a nuanced thing of my own. But we can play around with it too. But and then the fiduciary responsibilities too. So that would be in D4. I'll open it up to folks.
I don't have anything to add beyond the text or the email I provided. It's pretty simple.
Yeah, so one of the questions that came up was, how do we define fiduciary responsibilities? Director Dressley did actually take a look in statute and other policy, and what does it look like, or what is the definition of fiduciary responsibility for a board member? It's not anywhere to be found. So she did provide her own definition, which I agree with. It is something that policy committee can take back. I do, just my own thoughts, fiduciary responsibility, it seems a little redundant to taxpayer responsibility as a board member, but it's also not something that I'm going to argue with either.
Well, thank you for doing the research. I appreciate at least understanding that there's not a standing definition. at least we accept that or recognize that, because I didn't want it to be a thing that existed statutorily and not fully understand what it meant. So, okay. Thank you for that research.
Policy 212, school board member development. The committee met and we recommend approval with the changes that are reflective around on here.
So when you say, just for my personal clarification, is that we would anticipate seeing this with the reddish text for action in July?
Yes.
Right? Okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure I understood what you were saying. Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Same with policies, now 630 grading. Recommend approval for then July. And policy 908, naming policy. Recommending approval for July, pending any other considerations.
I just have a point of clarification. So 209, 212, and 630 and 908 will all be for approval next, our next board meeting in July. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I think we'll see over the course, and you guys have seen it, that big block of statutory requirements coming through. Those will come through on a slightly different schedule than what we've seen, because we do allow in our policies a single meeting action for things that are statutory requirement or non-significant change. So, changing MSBA model policy to ISD policy, for example, in a cross-reference. But these kind of that have been following the more standard practice, we would aim for a first and a second reading and action at a future meeting, which in this case would be July.
That's it.
All right, thank you. With that, we move to our action items for tonight. I'm just gonna get my screen at a size that I can read. And our first item for tonight is our consent agenda. Can I get a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda?
So move, Malm.
Second, Dressley.
Is there any discussion? Director Tate?
In policy 516, the student medication policy, there is one section that I'm unclear on why I guess it looks the way it does. It's under 3F, epinephrine, it's 3F1. It just says,
If you could just slow down long enough.
sorry.
To let Ms. Garcia get it
Yep.
up. So this is embedded
It's
in.
blue, it's blue font, so it'll stick out when you get to it.
Open up the policy.
Okay,
Board book.
okay.
So, yeah, that was an oversight. I apologize about that. So it did, the Minnesota statute ?
Yeah,
That one,
exactly.
It is, it's under the Good Samaritan law, so that does reflect in there now. So you'll see that Becky has it pulled up, so that it's in there.
Perfect, thank you.
Change. Yeah, notice that.
Is there any further discussion? Okay. Hearing none, all those in favor of the consent agenda signify by saying aye. Aye. Pose same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Our next item for individual action. Next, we move to items for individual action, excuse me. Our first item is the ISD 200 long-term facilities maintenance plan. Do we want a short presentation before
Okay,
taking a
we'll go.
motion? Thank you.
Thank you, members of the board. I've got the LTFM review and application for the state here tonight. This is LTFM. It stands for Long-Term Facilities Maintenance, and it's a revenue source that school districts receive from the state to repair and replace building systems. And that can be anything from replacing carpet, interior finishes, HVAC systems, electrical, plumbing, things like that. So you'll see on the agenda that there's 3 documents for you to review. The first one, the 10-year expenditures application. The state requires each district to create a plan for 10 years into the future of what building systems will need maintenance and attach a budget number to that. So this plan has changed a little bit. We communicated to the board some time ago that we would have a facilities assessment, and that's been completed, and we've been able to review that. So the numbers that you see in this application reflect what ICS found in their facilities assessment. You'll see the years across the top and codes down the left for each type of replacement. And then in the LTFM revenue spreadsheet, you'll see how much the district is receiving in revenue. And this is a per pupil formula that the state uses our projection for how many pupils we'll have in future years to tell us how much revenue we'll have in that future year. So if you look at line number 10, that's the initial district revenue from LTFM going across in future years to the right. You'll see that it kind of reflects our declining enrollment, and that's a slow decline in revenue for LTFM. And then the third document that you'll see on the agenda tonight is a statement of assurances, and that's essentially ISD 200's communication to the Commissioner of Education that we've done our due diligence, we've put budget numbers to what we hope to repair or replace in the future. So if anybody's got any questions, I can answer those.
I have a statement and then I'll have a question at the end. So there was a question raised about taking action to approve this report, given that we're in the process of moving to a new superintendent, and I did receive an email assurance from Dr. Champa that she was very comfortable with the process that we used to get to this point. And this is an annual submission, so it can be updated and will be reviewed, especially for those out years as we know more. So I just want to make sure that people were aware that that had been followed up on. And then for clarification on the motion, we'd be asking for, you're asking for the board's approval on the LTFM submit, just like an LTFM submission to the state of Minnesota.
That's correct.
And then however many
Yep.
documents that entails.
Yep.
up
So
to
it
you
would be
guys.
these 3 documents that we send to the state.
Does anybody have
Madam
any
Chair,
questions?
I'd be happy to make the motion to approve the long-term facilities maintenance documentation for the year.
Second, Mullen.
Thank you. Is there any further discussions or questions for Mr. Peterson? Director Dressley.
Can we just have clarification that it's for fiscal year 2025?
Is that the intent of the documents represented?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that can be reflected in the motion that was for the documents reflected in board book, which are FY 2025 long-term maintenance. Are there any further comments? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Our next item for individual action is the 2023-2024 school year budget. At this point, I'd like to ask our Director of Business to speak to that issue, and I think she's going to maintain the chair she is currently in.
All right, so tonight we have the adopted budget up for approval, and per Minnesota statute, it is required that the school district approve a budget for the next fiscal year prior to July 1. So I've put together a PowerPoint that is basically just the slides that are in the packet that's in board book. It just helps be able to see it better on the screen, so there's really no new or different information in this. It's the same information that's in board book and will be posted to our website. I clicked, but it's not, I don't know, maybe it's not on. There we go. All right, so this first page, we're looking at the summary of changes for the general fund, and we'll start with revenues. Pupil units, so the adjusted pupil units for 23-24 is 4,468. That is 14 less than the 22-23 projection. And then this number is based on prior year October 1 MARS data and projected forward based on prior year trend. On October 1, 2023, once we have students in seats, a new projection will be done for 23-24 and the future years and will be updated in the revised budget. As we look at the unassigned revenues, the first change is for the general ed formula. So there was a 4% increase to the formula this year legislatively. It puts that allocation at 7,138. So overall for our district, that amounted to a little over $1 million. Our levy and taxes, again, there was an increase there of 1.9 million. And we talked about that at the last Truth in Taxation meeting, but the major contributing factors for that were the inflationary adjustments, and that was both current year and prior year. That was about 1.4 million. And then the board had voted to approve the OPEB levy in the amount of 327,000. So that's included in there. And then our ESSER funds are starting to decrease. So we have $1 million less in ESSER funds. So the revenue goes down, but when we get to the expenditures, you'll also see that our expenditures for ESSER funds go down. Title programs, again, a decrease in revenue of about $70,000. And this is the second year now that we've seen that decrease in title. And it's really based on the Hastings childhood poverty level being less than 5%. So we used to qualify for 2 components of funding. And now with that going down to being less than 5%, we're only qualifying for the basic funding component. So as a district, we're using compensatory funding to maintain that level of programming. The music therapy reimbursement, so that program has been eliminated for next year. So there's the decrease in the revenue that we receive from other districts because we kind of outsource that position to other districts. On the expenditure side, though, you'll also see the decrease in expenditures for that salary and benefits. The American Indian Aid, that's an increase of about $30,000, and legislatively there was an increase to that funding source. So that goes up, but then you'll also see an increase in the expenditures. The special ed federal aid offset by expenditures, it's an increase of about $24,000. So those allocations just change year to year of what we receive federally for special ed. So we're increasing what we're coding to federal by about that $24,000. And then the last one is the state special ed aid. So legislatively, there was the special ed cross subsidy aid that has been incorporated into this budget, and that's about $2.2 million. And that includes the cross subsidy aid plus the regular increase in aid that we would see due to the increase in expenditures. When we get to the expenditures, payroll expenditures, increase of about 3.7 million. So that is salary and benefits. A teacher FTE that's included in this budget is at 306.2. And then all groups are based on actuals with the exception of teachers, paraprofessionals, and nurses are estimates for the general fund. The other expenditures, so a lot of these we've already talked about, the ESSER funds are being reduced. The property and liability insurance, there was a premium increase on that to account for that $76,000. The title program, again, that same reduction that we saw in the reduction of revenue. American Indian, the increase. Transportation, our transportation contract is currently being negotiated. So this is just an estimate of what we're anticipating for next fiscal year. That's $800,000. And then utilities, an increase of $162,000. The district-wide budgets has an increase of about $72,000, and that's for all of the annual renewals for software and different things that we use on a district-wide basis. Building supply budgets are adjusted each year based on student enrollment at each building. So there's an overall reduction of about $3,000 there. The music therapy reduction, that's for the elimination of that program. And then the audit entry. So at the time the 22-23 adopted budget was approved, our expenditures were greater than the revenue. So an audit entry was required to set aside funds in the prior year to cover that projected overspend. And then the special ed for federal, the increase in expenditures of about $24,000, and then just all other miscellaneous budgets district-wide, there was an increase of about $16,000. So overall, the change from our 22-23 revised budget is $700,000. This next page is just a summary of all of the accounts. So you can see we have restricted accounts, which by statute have to be used for a specific purpose, and then any unspent funds are kind of reserved within those accounts. Committed would be anything that's designated for a specific purpose by board action. So that's where like that technology committed account is. And then unassigned, that's just the general account that the district uses for all other expenditures and revenues. The fund balance, so the school board has a policy on unassigned fund balance, and it states that the policy is a minimum of 2 months or approximately 16% of our operating expenses. So that comes to about $10.3 million. And for 23-24, our projected ending unassigned balance will be $14.7 million, or approximately 23%. So while we're above the 16%, just keep in mind that policy is really set to be the minimum 2 months of operating expenses. So this next page just shows the restricted accounts. And again, these are accounts that have a specified purpose. The funds are held separately from any other account. If we were to overspend in any of these accounts, the overspending needs to come from the unassigned. So you can see what some of these examples are, like staff development, LTFM, operating capital, things like that. The one thing that's kind of worth noting on this page is the basic skills revenue. So because of some of the new ways people can qualify for the free and reduced, that impacted our basic skills revenue. So usually we would get about $450,000. For this year, we're getting $1.4 million roughly. So we are using that to pay for some of the new positions legislatively. Dr. McDowell just recently kind of mentioned the positions that we're budgeting for related to the non-exclusionary discipline. So that's where those positions are being coded. The committed account, so again, this is the kind of specific purpose, and it's by school board vote. So we have 2 accounts. There's the pension and accumulated sick leave account, and then the technology. So the total between those is a little over $1 million. And then the unassigned, so this is kind of our general funding for all current and future years' expenditures. It accounts for all of our other miscellaneous revenues and expenditures. And you can see there's a few lines there. So basic skills, typically we would overspend in basic skills. This year because of the higher allocation, we are not. But we do overspend for the Area Learning Center and the Safe Schools or Crime Levy. Some of the other things that I list out on here is just the state special ed. So in the past, this number has been much higher, more like in the $3.2 million range. But with that additional cross-subsidy funding, that overspend comes down. And then transportation, we've just always shown that separately. At one point in time, that was fully funded. It is not fully funded anymore, so you can see what that costs the district in excess of the funding that we receive. So overall, we are planning to overspend in the 23-24 year by $46,000. That's it for that one. All right, so then I just kind of go into some graphs, the unassigned by source. So overall, our unassigned revenues are 58.8 million. Our largest revenue source is state aids at 73%. Our state aid revenue is approximately $43.4 million. And then the second largest revenue source is our property taxes at 17.88%, or approximately $10.5 million. We can look at expenditures then by object, and the proposed unassigned general fund expenditures for fiscal year 24 are $58.6 million. The largest expenditure category is salary and wages at roughly 56%, or about $32.5 million. The second largest category is the employee benefits, and that accounts for about 25% of the district budget, or $14.8 million. So between salaries, wages, and benefits, that accounts for over 80% of the district unassigned expenditures. If you add in purchase services to that, which is often staffing positions that we're not able or just can't fill in-house, or for another reason we look to contract for those, overall that would be 97% of the unassigned expenditures. And then the last way is just kind of looking at expenditures by program. So if you look through these expenditures and you add up the instructional categories, or the ones that go directly into the classroom, it represents over 80% of the budget. Quick look at enrollment. So we do have, or are anticipating, declining enrollment. You can see that graphically with the pupil units and then the adjusted pupil units. And then down at the bottom of each one of those years, you can see what the general ed formula allowance is. So for 23-24, it's 7,138, which had the 4% increase. And then for 24-25, it's a 2% increase. And then for 25-26 on forward, it is tied to inflation. And that will be based on the consumer price index with a 2% floor and a 3% ceiling. So at this point, I've assumed a 2% annual increase conservatively. The district also does receive declining enrollment revenue. So as our enrollment decreases, whatever that number of decrease is, we do get 20% of the general ed formula. So for fiscal year 23, that decrease is relatively small, 14. But if you take 14 times the 28% of the general ed formula, it earns about $28,000 in declining enrollment revenue. Just a quick look at the referendum and local optional revenue. So for 23-24, the referendum amount is $1,613, and then the local optional revenue has stayed constant at that $724. Right now, if you look at 24-25, that referendum amount drops down to $942, and that's just because the reports have not been updated yet. So the board just recently renewed that, so that will be updated in future reports, and that number will be updated. The next referendum is expiring in 27-28. That will be the last year of revenue on that issuance, and that accounts for about $4.1 million annually. So when we get to the revised budget, again, we'll use the October 1 student enrollment and update those projections. Staffing, any staffing that's added or not needed due to student numbers will be reflected in that revised budget. Employee contract settlement. So again, we have nurses, teachers, paras, and food service. Those will be updated for the revised. And then right now we have open positions that I've just used an estimate on, so the actual hires will replace the estimates I have in there. And then any legislative changes to revenue and expenditure calculations that haven't been incorporated. So all of the major changes have been incorporated, but there are some smaller ones that we're waiting for some more guidance on. So those will be incorporated at the time of the revised budget. And then if there was any adjustments that came out of the 22-23 audit, all of that would be incorporated. So then we can look at some of the other funds. So the next one is the food service fund. And for this fund, you can see we're anticipating the fund balance being at about $800,000 at the end of the 23-24 school year. So there will be free meals starting with this next school year. We have not yet received the reimbursement rates, so I'm using a conservative estimate. So that will definitely be updated at the time of the revised budget. And then I'm also using an estimate for contract settlements and increased participation. So ideally with free meals, we'll see an increase in participation that will bring in more revenue, but then also additional food costs. The next one is the Community Service Fund, and their ending balance at the 23-24 school year would be $81,000. There are definitely some legislative changes yet to be incorporated for community service, so we haven't received as much detail on some of these changes, so that will be incorporated for the revised. And then with Community Ed, the programs are evaluated throughout the year for participation, and adjustments are made on an ongoing basis. The Building Construction Fund. So you can see this one has a starting balance listed as 0. It is taking us a little bit longer to spend those funds than we had previously anticipated. So the audited beginning balance will actually have the dollars there. So it will have a higher balance due to the timing of the projects. And then all or almost all of the remaining bond construction funds will be spent in 23-24. The debt service fund, we have 3 outstanding issuances. So there's a 2011A with the final payment being February of 24, the 2016A that goes out to 2030, and then the 2018A that goes out to 2041. And then the last fund is the trust funds. So we have a Fund 18 that accounts for our community ed pension and accumulated sick leave. So this is a reserve related to the community ed retirements. And then we have self-funded dental and health. And then the last one is Fund 45, which is an irrevocable trust for other post-employment benefits. And that's the end of my presentation. I can take any questions if there are any.
I know Director Subert answered a number of questions in advance of tonight, but Director Zuzik?
I'm shooting for a question here. There were some funds that you said we historically go over budget on, like the ALC, et cetera, or the Area Learning Center. And so we anticipate going over budget again. And I wonder, why is the budget what it is then? Or like, should we be budgeting more?
Yeah, so the budget is accurate. It's just that we're overspending the revenue that we bring in.
Thank you.
For that restricted
Thank you.
account. So
Sorry, I
that's,
missed it.
Yep, that's one of those accounts that if we overspend it, that amount needs to come out of the
General
unassigned.
fund. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. It just didn't make sense to me.
Are there any further questions on the budget? Hearing none at this time, I would entertain a motion and a second to adopt the 2023 budget as presented.
So move, Mom.
Second, Dressley.
Last call for final discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Our next action is approval of a choir trip to New York City. I will say that, again, this was a observation raised up during meeting preparation. We have 3 trips boom, 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 in terms of action items. They are not insignificant trips, and they have not insignificant cost. They're trips that are developed by the leadership of that group. And so in the absence of guidance from the school board restricting or setting a parameter about that amount, it's going to be an amount that they've worked with their group on developing and feel like they can support. So something potentially available for consideration in the future. That being said, our first action item that I would entertain a motion and a second on is the Hastings High School choir trip to New York City. A motion and a second for approval.
I would motion for approval. Suzak.
All right.
Second, Mull.
Is there any discussion? Okay, I'm gonna go this way down the line. So, Director Mull.
Very, hopefully, quick question. I feel like I know the answer, but to ensure that, yes, not insignificant costs. Are there like scholarships available, or how is that now? I'm taking a look at the Greece trip too. That's not until 2025, so there's some planning that if a student wants to go. But I'm just thinking, well, they are optional too, but if a student who does not have the financial means per se to go, are there opportunities if they really want to do this? Like, is it fundraising? What does that kind of look like?
That would be something different for each of the individual groups as they set up the trips. These are, like Chair Hadeen said, they're individual group trips. The reason that they come to the school board for approval really is more of an acknowledgement that you have a group that are students of the district and employees that are going to take a trip that is more than going across the state line, right? And all the things that come with it. To Chair Hadeen's point, if the board wanted to put some parameter around that, that would be a discussion to have, because it would impact all the groups, because you don't know which group is going to come up with a trip on any given year. I will say that while they're optional, most of the time groups have something set up that they can at least help built into the cost. And it's also the reason why a lot of these trips go out for approval a year to a year and a half in advance, is so that, because there are fundraising efforts, there's opportunities for kids, families to work it off, because they're not cheap trips.
Director Dressley.
So I had much of the same. I do know that there's fundraising, but these are significantly expensive trips, all of them. And I don't know if maybe that's something we want to have or we could put out for further discussion, not during this exact approval, but.
It's a thing to let bubble in your mind. It's a thing to let bubble in your mind. And then we can decide. There's a lot of implications and pros and cons, but I think seeing 3 of them back to back to back is certainly a little eye-opening in that regard. Did you have anything else, Director Dressley, at this time? Okay, Director Tate.
I had the same question and concerns, and I guess I would like to request that the board have a discussion about this in the future. And I guess my biggest concern is that if only expensive trips are offered and students don't have the means, then they do feel left out. So I just feel that it's appropriate that we have that discussion. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I totally hear you. I'm not going to throw it on a particular date at this time, but as I sit down and talk with incoming Superintendent Chapa, we can look at the cycle of the next year and look for a time when it would be meaningful to have that conversation. Director Davis.
Just piggybacking on Director Tate here, I just want to make sure that as part of that conversation, which I do think is important to have, that one of the things we recognize is not only is there a cost impact to this, but what you end up also having is kids that are participating in different groupings that may want to go on multiple trips, but when they all come cavalcading down at once, first of all, they can't. Second, what ends up happening is there are certain minimums within travel groups to be able to go at a certain price point. After that, you either can't have your own group go, or you have to go with another group. By all groups doing things in similar years at similar times, it takes those kids and it starts to create a border war within the school as to which department's going to, quote, win the kids. So if we could look at this and try to figure that out, it might be helpful so that you don't have colleagues going, why are you offering a trip at the same time? You see where I'm going. Yeah.
I see where you're going. And I don't want to extend this conversation because I know we're going to
No, I don't either. I'm just saying.
But I want us to remember our role is at the governance level. It's not to solve some of that problem. So that'll be an interesting conversation to have. I'm going to say out loud right now, just so we don't lose track of it, I'm adding it to the December work session. I have no reason to believe we're actually discussing it in December. I just don't have any months in my calendar beyond that, and it'll be a thing then that we don't lose track of. So. Is there any further discussion with regard to this? I do believe we have a motion and a second on the table for the choir trip. I can't type and run this at the same time. All right, hearing no further discussion, all those in favor of the choir trip to New York City signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. The next action item is a band and orchestra trip. Spring break performance tour to Greece. I've never even been to Greece. And this is spring break of 2025. Okay, so the question about timing, at least this is offset by year, but this is 2025. Can I get a motion in a second?
So move, Mom.
Second, Dressley.
Is there any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. 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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Our next action item is a language arts trip, not to LA, even though it looks like that when it got put listed as the action item, but to Ireland and England, and this is a summer of 2025 trip. Summer of 2025. Could I get a motion in a second with regard to this trip?
Motion, Zuzek.
Second, Dressley.
Is there any discussion specific to this trip? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Our next item is a designation of identified officials with authority. And this is something we commonly see at our organizational meeting, but given the change in leadership that we have between now and our next board meeting, we're seeing it again. So at this time, I would ask for a motion and a second for the recommended motion. No need to read it in detail, but a motion and a second for the recommended motion.
Zuzek, motion to approve the recommended motion.
Second, Mom.
Is there any discussion on this item? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Somebody remind me to type that in December, because clearly I'm not doing it right now. Thank you. Motion carries unanimously. Our next action item is resolution establishing dates for filing affidavits of candidacy. I would entertain a motion in a second that includes waiving of the reading of the resolution, but this establishes the dates for filing.
I would like to make a motion for approval of the resolution establishing dates for filing affidavits of candidacy, including waiving the reading of the resolution.
Second, Dressley.
Thank you. For purposes of discussion, I will say that the dates for anybody that's listening, but doesn't want to hear the whole resolution, that filing period will open on the 1st of August, 2023, and will close on August 15th. And the closing time is at 5:00 p.m. on August 15th, if anybody's of concern. And this is posted in its entirety on Board Book. for anybody that's interested and wants to do that. And it will cost you an entire $2 to file. So start shaking the sofa cushions right now. Get yourself ready. All right. Do we have any further discussion with regard to the resolution, the motion on the table? All right. Hearing none, I would ask for a roll call vote, as that is our practice with regard to resolutions. Director Davis, Treasurer Davis.
Director Dressley.
Yes.
Director Tate.
Yes.
Director Zuzik.
Yes.
Director Beisel absent. Director Davis, yes. Vice Chair Mom.
Yes.
Chair Hadeen.
Yes. With that, the motion carries unanimously to approve that resolution. That's the end of our action items for tonight. Our next topic is future meetings and topics. Items that we have coming up, we have a July work session at which we're going to receive information with regard to the technology and curriculum levy. I would anticipate at that time that we're going to hear about the dollar value that would be that could be eligible based on current expenditures in those two categories, and something with regard to the impacts, the tax impacts associated with that. I anticipate a presentation from teaching and learning with regard to gifted and talented differentiated learning in the curriculum review process or curriculum cycle, as well as a conversation about what direction the board is interested in going with regard to the next self-evaluation. Those are topics that I currently am aware of with regard to our July business meeting. I would see us a continued adoption of statutory mandated policy revisions based primarily on MSBA's guidance, as along with the policies that we completed a second reading on tonight. Please note that the date of the July business meeting has moved to Thursday, the 27th of July. We will still be at 6 o'clock. We will say for purposes of today that we'll be in this room, but that may not be true based on construction in this site. In the event that we need to be someplace different, it'll be posted. With regard to the technology and curriculum levy, in the event that we want to have something on the November ballot, that needs to be identified by the July business meeting. So we would need to take action at a minimum stating that we intend to have technology and curriculum levy on the ballot. That would notify Dakota County to hold place in their printing. It would be possible at that time, if we've had all of our questions answered, depending on how the meeting, our work session goes in July, that we might be able to just take action that adopts the dollar value and moves us forward. Should we consider it to be going forward? In the event that we do not do that, and we would need to make a decision with regard to a detailed number, we're currently considering doing that as a single action special meeting on the night of 9th of August, which is already a work session. So it would not be an extra night to come in. And that would give us time to coordinate with, give us, meaning our administrative office, time to coordinate with Dakota County and make sure that the language is accurate and that both parties have had an opportunity to review it. And in the event that our choice with regard to board self-evaluation has a cost, that we would make a commitment to that expenditure at the July business meeting. I anticipate at our August work session, we're going to need to start working on our updated 3-year board work plan, and as well as superintendent goals, because those sort of tend to come together. We've seen that be true in the past. We need to consider at that, I think, need to consider at that time implications of adding a student school board member, both with regard to policies, procedures, and selection process. MSBA has a really nice piece of information on their website about just things to think about. I would encourage you all to take a few minutes to look at that, kind of thinking about what would the role of that person be? What would they participate in? How would we ensure that we hear their voice while still respecting data privacy concerns, given that this would likely be a secondary student? And then, I don't know exactly when this comes, but I anticipate somewhere in the late summer, early fall, we're going to get our innovation teams coming back with some of their feedback based on the alternative secondary method or structures that they considered it the last time. We'll hear some of those pros and cons. Tentatively have it written down in August. It could very well be a September thing. I don't know. We'll see where that goes. Our August business meeting, continue to do policy approvals and or attempt to establish an approved 3-year board work plan and superintendent goals. Big, broad stuff of what's coming up. Policy, they're just gonna meet all the time for really long periods of time, and then they're gonna give us a really nice summary. Their specific dates are on the future meetings. And then out there, I'm gonna write down that we will not, I don't wanna lose track of the conversations about trips and guardrails, maybe. We wanna talk about that and out in the future. So that's what I see coming. And then looking all the way out to September, that's when I think we're gonna dig into this question about procedures and process and both how they get represented and then just what they are, right? That'll start at the work session and we'll see how that goes. In the future, that would be an org meeting type conversation. All right. So at this time, I should have totally laid money on this. I was trying to get somebody to bet me that we'd be done at this portion of the meeting at around 8 o'clock. I did go over, but just because I'm rambly. If I had put money down the table, man, we would have been done 5 minutes ago. So at this time, and this was posted at our meeting notice, so people expect this. I would request a motion to move into a closed session to engage in board development activities. This will be happening at the Hastings District Office in the conference room A. I would anticipate it's going to take us 10 minutes to get down there, use the restroom, fill water bottles, and be ready to go. That's implied in the motion.
So moved, Dressley.
Second, Zuzek.
All right. Terrific. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. All right, I will see everybody at 8:15. I'm really only giving you 9 minutes. At the closed session. There will be snacks. Snacks will be available. That should motivate you to make 9 minutes.
No.